Nobody warned Dominique Washington that the call would come on a Tuesday, not a Wednesday, not a Friday, a Tuesday, the most ordinary, forgettable day of the week. She was standing in her kitchen, still in her bathrobe, still holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold 3 hours ago, when her phone rang. She almost didn't pick up. The name on the screen made her whole body go still. 3 words. 3 little words that hit her like a freight train. Simone, big sis. Dominique stared at that name for 4 full rings. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Her heart was pounding like it was trying to escape her chest. She hadn't spoken to Simone in 2 years, 3 months, and if she was being honest, 11 days. Not that she was counting, she picked up on the 5th ring. Simone's voice came through the speaker, low and thick, like she'd been crying for hours. "Dom, I need you." Dominique closed her eyes. She felt the old pull, the one she'd been fighting for over 2 years. The one that said, "She's your sister. No matter what she did, she's your sister." But she also felt something else, something sharp and cold like a knife sliding between her ribs. "You need me," Dominique said quietly. "That's really funny, Simone, because the last time I needed you, you weren't there." Silence on the other end of the line was so heavy it had weight. "Dom, where were you, Simone?" Dominique's voice cracked. "Where were you when I lost everything? Now let's go back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start with a phone call. It starts with 2 little girls in Atlanta, Georgia, who once believed that sisters were the one thing in this world that could never be broken. And it ends well. You'll have to stay with us to find out how it ends. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. This story is going to take everything out of you. And trust me, you need to be here for all of it. Simone and Dominique Washington grew up in a small yellow house on Pemberton Street in southwest Atlanta. Their mother, Claudette Washington, was a woman built like a storm, beautiful, wild, and gone before you even knew what hit you. She left when Dominique was 4 and Simone was 7. No note, no explanation, just an empty closet and the ghost of her perfume on the pillow. Their grandmother, Pearl Washington, everybody called her Big Mama Pearl, raised them from that day forward. Big Mama Pearl was a stout woman with silver locks, a voice like a church organ, and the kind of love that showed up as a hot meal, a firm hand, and a belt if you pushed your luck. She didn't have much money, but she had enough to keep the lights on, enough to keep the girls in school clothes, enough to make sure there was always a pot of something on the stove when they came home. Simone was the older one, the responsible one, the one who made sure Dominique's braids were neat before school, who helped her with homework, who walked her to the bus stop every morning without fail. Simone was the kind of big sister that little girls wrote about in their diaries. Dominique worshipped her. "Simone, do you think Mama ever thinks about us?" Dominique asked one evening. She was maybe 6 years old, sitting on the porch steps with her knees pulled up to her chest. Simone was 8, and she sat beside her, staring out at the street with an expression that was too old for her face. "Probably," Simone said after a moment. "Then why doesn't she come back?" Simone put her arm around her little sister. "I don't know, Dom, but I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? I'm right here." Dominique leaned into her sister and believed every single word. That was the first promise Simone ever made to her. It would not be the last. And unlike that one, not all of them would be kept. By the time the girls were teenagers, the gap between them had started to show. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way you could point to and say, "There, that's where it started." It was subtle, like a crack in a foundation, invisible at first, dangerous later. Simone was everything. Smart, beautiful, magnetic. When Simone Washington walked into a room, people looked. She had their mother's cheekbones and Big Mama Pearl's sharp eyes, and she carried herself like she already knew exactly where she was going and how fast she planned to get there. She was voted class president junior year. She ran track and broke 2 school records. She got a full scholarship to Georgia State University to study business. When the acceptance letter came in the mail, Big Mama Pearl held it to her chest and cried in a way none of them had ever seen before. "Lord have mercy," Big Mama Pearl said, shaking her head slowly. "Look what we raised." Dominique was different. She was quieter, more inside herself. She had a gift for art. She could draw anything, paint anything, make something beautiful out of nothing. But talent and confidence are 2 completely different things, and Dominique had plenty of the first and almost none of the second. Where Simone walked into rooms, Dominique sort of slipped in through the side door. She still loved her sister fiercely, and Simone still loved her back. But when Simone left for college, something shifted. Simone was suddenly busy, studying, building a life, making new friends, and Dominique was back on Pemberton Street with Big Mama Pearl, feeling like the whole world had moved on without her. That loneliness planted seeds that would take years to bloom. His name was Callum Delaney, and he was the kind of man that trouble always seemed to follow, not because he went looking for it, but because it couldn't help chasing him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a slow smile that made women forget what they were saying mid-sentence. He drove a black Charger, wore a watch that cost more than most people's rent, and had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when he looked at you. Dominique met him at a gallery opening in Atlanta the summer she turned 22. She'd just gotten a small piece exhibited her first real showing, and she was standing in the corner of the room, terrified, wearing a dress she'd borrowed from her neighbor because she couldn't afford a new one. Callum had walked straight to her painting, stood in front of it for a full 2 minutes, and then he'd turned and found her in the crowd like he'd known exactly who made it. "This yours?" he asked. "Yes," Dominique said. "It's the best thing in this room," Callum said simply, not like he was trying to impress her, like it was just a fact. Dominique was gone from that moment forward. They dated for 8 months before he proposed. A simple ring, but it was real, a diamond solitaire that he'd saved for. He got down on one knee in Big Mama Pearl's living room, which made Pearl press her hand to her heart and say, "Boy, you better stand up and let me hug you before I fall out." They were all laughing. They were all happy. But there was someone missing from that living room. Simone. Simone had met Callum exactly twice before the proposal. Once at a family dinner 3 months into the relationship, and once at Big Mama Pearl's birthday. Both times she had been perfectly polite, smiled, shaken his hand, asked the right questions, but something about the way she watched him made Dominique's stomach tighten in a way she couldn't explain. Not jealousy, not disapproval, something else. Something she buried and refused to look at. "What do you think of Callum?" Dominique had asked her sister that second time, as they washed dishes in Big Mama Pearl's kitchen. Simone had paused for just a beat too long. "He seems to really care about you," she said finally. "That's not what I asked," Dominique said. Simone turned to look at her. Her expression was carefully neutral. "I think you're happy, Dom, and I want you to be happy." It wasn't a yes. But Dominique chose to hear it as one. They got married the following spring. A small ceremony at a venue in Decatur. Cream flowers, soft lights, and a crowd of maybe 60 people. Big Mama Pearl wore her best church hat and cried from the opening prayer straight through to the reception. Dominique was radiant. She'd made her own bouquet, white ranunculus and eucalyptus, and she walked down the aisle feeling, for the first time in her life, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Simone was there, maid of honor. She gave a toast that made everyone in the room laugh and then cry in the span of about 90 seconds, which was a gift very few people had. She talked about the porch steps on Pemberton Street. She talked about 2 little girls who had survived hard things. She raised her glass and said, "To my sister, the bravest, most beautiful person I know, I am so proud of you." Dominique had looked at Simone across the room and mouthed, "I love you." Simone had mouthed it back. Nobody in that room could have seen what was coming. Nobody could have guessed that within 18 months, those 2 women would not be speaking. That Dominique Washington, now Dominique Delaney, would be sitting on the floor of her bathroom at 2 in the morning with nothing left. But it was coming, and the worst part, the very worst part, Dominique wouldn't even see it until it was too late. The first year of marriage was beautiful. Callum worked in real estate wholesaling properties, connecting buyers and sellers, and he was good at it. Money flowed in and out of their lives in a way that felt exciting at first. A new apartment in Midtown, a car upgrade, vacations that Dominique posted on Instagram with captions that said things like, "Living my best life with my best person." Dominique opened a small art studio out of a rented space in East Atlanta. She taught weekend classes and sold pieces online. It wasn't enough to live on, but Callum said not to worry. He said he had it handled. "Trust me, baby," he said whenever money got tight. "I always come through. Haven't I always come through?" And he had, so she did. The trouble started slowly, the way it always does. Callum started coming home later, started taking calls in the other room and shutting the door, started having long, quiet conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. She would ask, and he would kiss her forehead and say it was business. Just business. She believed him, because she wanted to, because it was easier than the alternative. It was Simone who said something first. They were having lunch together, one of their monthly catch-ups at a restaurant in Buckhead, when Simone put down her fork and looked at Dominique with an expression that made Dominique's appetite disappear. "I need to ask you something, and I need you not to get upset before you hear me out." Dominique said carefully, "Much do you know about Callum's business? Like specifically, the money, where it's coming from?" Dominique felt her jaw tighten. "He does real estate, Simone, you know this." "I know what he says," Simone replied, "but I've been asking around, Dom. I know people in that industry, and nobody knows Callum Delaney. Nobody has ever done a deal with Callum Delaney. I can't find a single property he's ever actually closed. Silence between them was electric. Been investigating my husband, Dominique said slowly. Been looking out for my sister, Simone said. I didn't ask you to. But that's what big sisters do. Dominique stared at her plate. Something cold moved through her chest. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to tell Simone to mind her own business. But underneath the anger, underneath the pride, there was something small and scared that had been living in her stomach for months. Something that nodded along with every word Simone said. She pushed it back down. Callum is my husband, Dominique said quietly. I trust him, and I'd appreciate it if you would too. Simone looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded and picked her fork back up. Okay, she said, I hear you. But she didn't let it go, and that would matter. Very, very soon. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now and drop a fire in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any story, because things are about to get a whole lot worse before they get better. It happened on a Thursday evening in October. Dominique had been at the studio all day, teaching a watercolor class. She came home to a dark apartment, which was odd, because Callum's car was in the garage. She called out for him. No answer. She found him in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark. His jacket was off. His tie was loose. And his face looked like something had been taken out of it. Like someone had reached in and scooped out the man she'd married. Callum, she said from the doorway. Baby, what's wrong? He looked up at her, and he said 4 words she would spend the next 2 years trying to forget. I need a lawyer. It came out in pieces after that, like a levee breaking. Slowly at first, and then all at once. Callum hadn't been doing real estate. He'd been part of a scheme of financial fraud involving fake investment accounts. Other people's money, money from people who trusted him. And now the FBI was involved. And the man who'd been running the operation had decided to cooperate with the government and name everyone underneath him, including Callum. Dominique sat on the bedroom floor because her legs gave out. She just sat there, listening, while her husband explained how he had spent the past 3 years building a life on a lie. Their apartment, their car, their vacation, all of it bought with money that wasn't theirs. Say something, Callum said. She couldn't. She had nothing left. The apartment was seized within 30 days. The car, the furniture, everything that hadn't been paid for clean was gone. Callum's lawyer managed to negotiate a plea deal, 18 months in federal prison and full cooperation. He would serve 14 with good behavior. Dominique moved back into Big Mama Pearl's house on Pemberton Street. She was 25 years old, broke, humiliated, and alone. And then Big Mama Pearl had a stroke. It happened 6 weeks after Dominique moved back in. Pearl was sitting in her kitchen chair, drinking her morning coffee, and then she wasn't sitting up straight anymore. The doctors said it was severe. She would recover, but not completely. She'd need full-time care. She'd need medications. She'd need things that cost money, money that Dominique didn't have. She called Simone from the hospital waiting room, hands shaking, voice barely holding. Simone, Big Mama had a stroke. She's stable, but she's going to need a lot of care. I need help. I can't do this alone. I need us to figure this out together. Silence on the other end lasted too long. Call you back, Simone said. She never did. Not that day, not next week. When Dominique finally got through to her, Simone said she was dealing with something at work. Said it was complicated. Said she would help when she could. She sent $200 for their grandmother, the woman who raised them both. Dominique used it to pay for Pearl's first week of medication and then stayed up every night for a month applying for art grants, selling paintings online, teaching extra classes, running herself to the bone to keep Pearl's lights on and Pearl's bills paid. She did it alone. And when she finally called Simone again, really called her, voice tight with desperation, Simone's phone went to voicemail. Dominique stood in Pearl's small kitchen, surrounded by mounting bills, with the smell of hospital-grade antiseptic on her hands, and she felt something inside her go permanently quiet, not anger. Anger would have been better, just gone. She erased Simone's name from her speed dial. Changed it in her phone to Simone. Big sis, she wouldn't call her again for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days, until Simone called her, on a Tuesday, the most ordinary, forgettable day of the week. Secrets have a smell. That's what Big Mama Pearl always said. She'd say it while peeling sweet potatoes at the kitchen table or stirring a pot of greens, calm as Sunday morning. Chilly, secrets got a smell, and if you sit still long enough, you can sniff 'em out. Dominique had never really understood that. She'd always thought Big Mama Pearl was just being dramatic in the way old women sometimes were. But now, standing in Simone's living room for the first time in 2 years, Dominique finally understood, because she could smell it. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time. And the look on Simone's face, the way her eyes didn't quite meet Dominique's, the way she kept touching the ends of her braids, the way she'd already apologized 4 times in 3 minutes before saying what she actually called for, that was the smell. "Just say it, Simone," Dominique said. Her voice was flat, controlled. The voice she'd learned to use when she needed to hold herself together. "Whatever it is, just say it." Simone opened her mouth, and what came out would break Dominique's world open for the second time. But to understand what Simone said, you need to understand what Simone knew, and when she knew it. Because that is where this story really lives, in the space between knowing and telling, in the terrible, painful distance between what love demands and what fear allows. Let's go back to the beginning. The real beginning, the one Dominique never got to see. While Dominique had been falling in love with Callum Delaney, Simone had been building her career in Atlanta's banking sector. She was a financial compliance analyst at a mid-sized firm in Buckhead, a job that, in plain English, meant she looked at money and figured out when something didn't smell right. She was very, very good at it. When Dominique first brought Callum to that family dinner, Simone had smiled and shaken his hand and asked the right questions. But she'd also noticed things, the kind of things most people missed. The watch that was too expensive for someone just starting out. The way he talked about real estate in general terms but got vague when specifics came up. The way his eyes moved around the room even when he was talking directly to you. She filed it away. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that not every man who wore a nice watch was a fraud, but then she ran into a colleague at a conference, a woman named Beverly Carr who worked in federal banking compliance, and Beverly mentioned casually over cocktails a case her division had been quietly building: financial fraud, fake investment accounts, a mid-level operation out of Atlanta. "The guy at the center of it," Beverly said, swirling her glass, "has a whole network of people underneath him. Most of them don't even know the full picture. They just know they're getting paid well and not to ask questions." "What's his name?" Simone asked. Beverly shook her head. "Can't say, active investigation, but it's going to be big when it breaks." Simone went home that night and sat in her dark car in her parking garage for 45 minutes. She thought about Callum Delaney, his expensive watch, his vague answers. His money that always seemed to be there but never quite came from anywhere you could point to. She thought about her sister. She picked up her phone and started making calls. Not official calls, she wasn't FBI, but she knew people. She asked around, quietly, carefully, and within 3 weeks she had enough to know that her instincts were right. Callum Delaney was dirty. She didn't know the full scope of it yet. She didn't know about the federal investigation, but she knew enough. She knew the money wasn't clean. She knew her sister was building a life on a foundation made of sand, and that was when she made the worst decision of her life. She decided to wait. Let's be fair to Simone for a moment, because it's easy to look at what she did and say, she should have told her. Simple, done, move on, but nothing about this was simple. When Simone found out, Dominique and Callum had been together for 5 months. They were clearly in love. Dominique, quiet, careful Dominique, who had always struggled to believe she deserved good things, was happy in a way Simone had never seen before. She was painting more, laughing more. She'd started talking about opening her studio, about the future, about the life she was finally building. And Simone had suspicions, evidence that pointed a certain direction but wasn't conclusive, wasn't provable. Wasn't the kind of thing you could put in front of a woman in love and expect her to believe over the man who was making her feel seen for the first time. Simone tried once. That lunch in Buckhead, when she asked Dominique about the money, when she said she'd been asking around, when Dominique had looked at her with ice in her eyes and said, "I trust him." "I could have pushed harder," Simone would say later. "I could have shown her what I had." But she hadn't, because she told herself she needed more. Because she told herself that if she was wrong, she would destroy her sister's marriage and their relationship in one swing. Because she told herself she needed to be sure. But here is the truth that Simone sat with in the dark, the truth that ate at her like acid. She was afraid, not of being wrong. She was 90% sure she was right. She was afraid of Dominique choosing Callum over her. She was afraid that if she pushed, Dominique would cut her out, that she would lose her sister. And that fear, that deeply human, deeply selfish fear, made her hesitate when she should have acted. She waited 3 more months. And then the proposal happened. And then the wedding. And by then, Simone had convinced herself that maybe the investigation wouldn't go anywhere. That maybe the house of cards would just stay standing. That maybe she'd been wrong. She had not been wrong. 2 weeks before the FBI moved on Callum, Simone got a call from Beverly Carr. "Atlanta case is about to close," Beverly said, her voice tight. "Arrests are coming. I can't give you names, but if you know anyone connected to it," she paused. "Anyone at all, they need to get ahead of this." Simone knew. She knew that Callum Delaney was about to be arrested. She knew that her sister's life was about to be blown apart. She knew that she had the information. She had always had the information to warn Dominique, to give her time, to help her protect herself. She picked up her phone. She pulled up Dominique's name, and she put the phone back down because she was scared, because she still didn't know how to start that conversation, because she had waited so long that telling the truth now would mean also confessing that she had known for months, that she had been at Dominique's wedding knowing what she knew, that she had given that toast, "I am so proud of you," while holding information that could have changed everything. The guilt had calcified into something she couldn't move through, so she did nothing. 2 weeks later, the FBI arrested Callum at their apartment. Dominique came home to find him already gone. She called Simone from the hospital parking lot with a trembling voice, and Simone answered and she said, "Oh my God, Dom, I'm so sorry. That's terrible. I had no idea," she said. "I had no idea." It was the biggest lie she had ever told. When Big Mama Pearl had her stroke and Dominique called in desperation, Simone froze, not because she didn't care. She cared desperately. The thought of Pearl, sick of Pearl, diminished, Pearl needing split her open. She loved Big Mama Pearl with every piece of herself, but she couldn't go back to Pemberton Street. If she went back, she'd have to look Dominique in the eye every day. She'd have to sit in Pearl's kitchen and help and be present while carrying the weight of what she'd kept. And she was terrified, genuinely, bone-deeply terrified that Dominique would somehow see it, would ask the wrong question at the wrong moment, and the truth would come spilling out. So she stayed away. She sent $200 because it was the only way she could make herself feel like she was doing something. And it was pitifully, shamefully not enough, and she knew it even as she sent it. She ignored Dominique's calls. She watched from a distance Dominique's art Instagram, occasional updates from mutual family friends, and she told herself she would fix it. She told herself she would find a way to make it right. She just needed time. She just needed to figure out how to do it. But time ran out. Big Mama Pearl passed away quietly 9 months after her stroke. She died in the small bedroom on Pemberton Street, with Dominique holding her hand, at 4:37 in the morning. Simone wasn't there. She found out from a cousin, not from Dominique, because Dominique didn't call her, and that right there was the moment Simone felt the full, devastating weight of what she had done. Not the marriage, not the money, not the arrest. Pearl. She had missed Pearl's last months. She had let her grandmother die without being there, because she had been too cowardly to tell the truth. She sat in her car outside her apartment complex, and she sobbed so hard she couldn't breathe. Then she drove to Pemberton Street. Dominique met her at the door. Her eyes were dry. Her face was a wall. "No," was all she said, and she closed the door. That was 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days ago. Don't stop now, we're right in the middle of it. If this story has you feeling things, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. Now we're back to where we started. Tuesday morning, cold coffee, a phone ringing with a name that had no right to be calling. Dominique had picked up. She didn't fully know why. Maybe because she was tired. Maybe because grief was a thing that softened you in ways you couldn't always predict. Pearl had been gone for 14 months. The anger had not faded, but underneath it, something else had started to move. Something that felt uncomfortably like longing. "I need you," Simone had said. And Dominique had said, "Where were you when I needed you?" "I know," Simone said. Her voice broke on the word. "I know, Dom, I don't have an excuse. I have an explanation. There's a difference, but I'm not going to use it to justify what I did. I just need to see you, please." 3 days later, Dominique drove to Simone's apartment in Decatur, not because she'd forgiven her. She made that clear before she even walked in the door. "I'm here because Big Mama Pearl would want me to hear you out," Dominique said, standing on Simone's doorstep. "Not because I'm ready to be okay with anything you did. You understand?" "Yes," Simone said. "Then let's go inside." They sat across from each other in Simone's living room. Simone had made coffee. Neither of them touched it. And Simone told her everything, from the moment she met Beverly Carr at that conference, through the months of suspicion and research and lunch conversations and failed attempts to say what she knew, through the proposal and the wedding and the arrest and the phone calls she ignored. She told it slowly, painfully, without softening any of it, without letting herself off any hook. Dominique didn't interrupt. She sat very still with her hands folded in her lap, her face completely unreadable. and she listened to the full account of how her sister had known for months and had said nothing, had let her walk down the aisle, had let her lose everything, had let Pearl spend her last months without her older granddaughter. When Simone finished, the room was so silent that they could both hear the traffic outside. "I'm so sorry," Simone said. It came out wrecked, barely a sentence. "I am so sorry, Dom. I was scared and selfish, and I kept telling myself there was a reason and there wasn't. There wasn't a reason, I just didn't know how to be brave enough to say it." Dominique said nothing for a very long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that Simone had to lean forward to hear her. "You let me sit at Big Mama's bedside alone," Dominique said. "For 9 months. You let me do that alone, Simone." Simone said. "She asked for you," Dominique continued. "In the last weeks, when she could still talk, she asked where you were, and I had to tell her you were busy. I had to lie to our grandmother on her deathbed to protect you." Something in Simone's face collapsed. "Need you to hear that," Dominique said. "I need you to understand what your silence actually cost. Not me, her." Simone was crying now, properly crying, the kind that has no grace or dignity in it. Dominique looked at her sister's crumbling face and felt something she hadn't expected. She felt sad, not angry, not vindicated, just profoundly, endlessly sad for the 2 years, for the things that couldn't be undone, for Pearl, for the sisters they had been on those porch steps in Southwest Atlanta when they'd believed nothing in this world could come between them. "I'm going to go," Dominique said. She stood up and picked up her bag. "Please, I heard you out," Dominique said at the door. She turned to look at her sister. "That's what I came to do, and I did it. What does that mean? What happens now?" Dominique looked at Simone for a long moment. "I don't know," she said honestly, and she walked out. Dominique drove home in silence. No music, no radio, just the sound of the city moving around her and the sound of her own breathing. She didn't cry. She'd been expecting to. He'd walked into Simone's apartment braced for the kind of confrontation that would require tears and raised voices and slammed doors. The kind she'd rehearsed in her head 100 times over 2 years, but it hadn't been that. It had been something quieter and harder. She thought about what Simone had said, about the fear, about the guilt that had calcified, about the lie she'd told the moment the FBI arrested Callum. I had no idea that Simone had been carrying alone ever since. She didn't excuse it. She wouldn't. The cost of that silence was real. The cost was Pearl. The cost was months of Dominique's life that she couldn't get back. But she also understood something, sitting in traffic on I-20, that she hadn't been ready to understand until today. Her sister was not a villain. Simone was a coward. A deeply flawed, deeply frightened person who had made the worst possible choices at every crucial moment. But she was not cruel. She had not done it out of malice. She had done it out of love that curdled into fear, that curdled into guilt, and she had been drowning in it alone for years. That did not make it right. But it made Dominique feel something other than just anger for the first time in a very long time. She pulled into her parking spot and sat in the car. She thought about Big Mama Pearl. Thought about what Pearl would have said, sitting at that kitchen table with her sweet potatoes and her silver locks and her voice like a church organ. Pearl would have said, "Baby, hurt people, but healed people can choose something different." Dominique sat with that for a while. Then she went inside and made herself dinner and didn't call Simone. Not yet. But for the first time in 2 years, 3 months, and some number of days, she left the door cracked. Just a little, just enough. 3 weeks after the visit, Dominique received a package in the mail. No note. No return address written out, just a P.O. box she recognized immediately as Simone's. The package was wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine, and it was the exact kind of deliberate, careful wrapping that Simone had always done for gifts. Even as a child, Simone's presents had looked like they came from a department store. Dominique's looked like a kindergartner had wrapped them in the dark. It had been a running joke between them for 20 years. She stood at her kitchen counter and held the package for a full minute before opening it. Inside was a journal, old, well-worn. The cover was burgundy leather, cracked at the corners and soft with age. Dominique turned it over and felt her heart stutter. It was Big Mama Pearl's handwriting on the inside cover, her big, looping cursive. A date from 6 years ago. She opened the first page, and she read. Big Mama Pearl had kept a journal for the last 6 years of her life. Nobody had known, not Dominique, not Simone, not any of the cousins or church friends or neighbors who thought they knew Pearl Washington down to her bones. She had written in it every evening before bed. Small things mostly, the weather, what she'd cooked, which neighbors had come by, but also bigger things, her memories, her fears, her hopes for the 2 girls she had raised. Simone had found it going through Pearl's things in the weeks after the funeral, When Dominique was too exhausted to deal with it and had asked her through a cousin, not directly to help sort through the house, Simone had read it, every page. She'd spent 2 nights on Pearl's floor going through it, and then she'd held onto it for over a year, not because she was keeping it from Dominique, but because she'd been afraid that sending it would feel like an intrusion. Afraid that Dominique would send it back unopened, afraid that she'd use the wrong moment and do more damage. But after their conversation, after sitting with everything she'd confessed and everything Dominique had said, Simone had decided, no more waiting, no more fear. She'd sent the journal. Dominique read it from cover to cover in one sitting. She didn't eat. She didn't move. She sat at her kitchen table with Pearl's words in her hands, and she let herself receive every single one. Pearl wrote about the day Claudette, their mother, had left, about standing at the window watching her oldest daughter walk down Pemberton Street and not come back, about the complicated grief of loving someone who keeps choosing to go. She wrote about the morning she'd realized the girls were fully hers now, that there was no one else coming, and about the way that knowledge had settled into her not as a burden, but as a purpose. She wrote about Simone. My Simone, Pearl wrote, is too hard on herself. She carries too much. She always has. I worry that her love comes with so much fear attached to it that she can't let herself just give it clean. She wrote about Dominique. My Dominique doesn't see herself clearly. She has always thought she was the lesser of the two, but it is simply not true. Dominique is the one who loves without condition. It is her gift and her wound at the same time. And near the very end, when Pearl's handwriting had gotten shakier, the letters bigger and further apart, she wrote about both of them together. I would not change one day of raising these girls, Pearl wrote, not one. They have made me proud in ways I don't have words for, and I know they are going through something hard right now. I know there is a wall between them that wasn't there before. I don't know all of what happened, but I know this, whatever it is not bigger than them. Nothing is bigger than what those two share. They just have to find their way back to each other. I pray every night that they will. Dominique turned the last page. She was crying so hard she couldn't see straight. She picked up her phone and called Simone. Simone picked up on the first ring. I got the journal, Dominique said. Her voice was a wreck. The good kind. I know, Simone said quietly. She prayed for us. She always prayed for us, Simone said. And then she started crying too. They cried together on the phone for a while. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. They met for coffee the following Saturday. Same restaurant in Buckhead where Simone had first tried to warn Dominique about Callum 2.5 years ago. Neither of them mentioned that out loud, but they both felt it. It was different from their last meeting. Less formal, less braced. Simone showed up first and was already seated when Dominique arrived, and when Dominique sat down, Simone said, I ordered your usual. I hope that's okay. Usual. Oat milk latte with an extra shot and a dash of cinnamon. The same thing she'd been ordering for 6 years. The fact that Simone still knew, still remembered, did something to Dominique's chest that she couldn't fully explain. Thank you, Dominique said. They talked for 4 hours. Not just about the hard things, though they talked about those too. They talked about Pearl. They shared memories that neither had thought about in years. They laughed, genuinely laughed more than once. Simone did an impression of Big Mama Pearl's look when one of them said something out of pocket, and Dominique laughed so hard she nearly knocked her coffee over. She would give you that look, Simone said, face perfectly still, eyes fully loaded with invisible judgment. Oh my God, stop, Dominique said, laughing. That's exactly it. That's literally exactly her. Perfected that look over decades, Simone said. That look was a whole ministry. They laughed until the server came by to ask if they needed anything and looked vaguely concerned that they might need medical attention instead. But they also talked about the hard things. Can I ask you something? Dominique said after a while. Her voice had shifted. Quieter, more careful. Anything, Simone said. When I told you at that lunch that I trusted Callum and I didn't want you to say anything else, do you think if you had pushed harder, I would have listened? Simone was quiet for a moment. Honest, thinking it through. No, she said finally. I don't think you would have, not then, not the way you felt about him. Dominique nodded slowly. That's what I thought too, which means, and I'm not saying this to let you off the hook, I'm saying it because I've been thinking about it. I don't know that you telling me earlier would have changed the ending. It might have just changed when it started. Maybe, Simone said, but you would have had more time to protect yourself. Financially, the apartment. Your name wasn't on some of those accounts. I know, Pearl. Simone's voice broke. You wouldn't have had to go through Pearl alone, Dominique said softly. I wouldn't have. Silence was long. But it was a different kind of silence than the ones they'd been sitting in for 2 years. This one had some air in it. Simone, Dominique said. Yeah, I'm not there yet. I need you to know that. I don't want to say I forgive you and then resent you in 6 months. That's not fair to either of us. I know, Simone said. I'm not asking for that. I don't want to be done with you either, Dominique continued. I don't think that's what I want. I don't think it's what Pearl would want. And I think we've both lost enough. Simone looked at her sister across the table. Her eyes were bright. So what are you saying? She asked. Saying, Dominique took a breath. I'm saying we start slow, we try, and we don't pretend it's fine before it actually is. Deal, deal, Simone said immediately. They looked at each other for a moment. And then Dominique very quietly reached across the table and put her hand over Simone's. Not a hug, not a reconciliation speech, just a hand. Just I'm here, it was enough. For now it was enough. 2 months after that Buckhead coffee, Dominique got a letter in the mail from a federal correctional facility in rural Georgia. She knew before she opened it. The return address. The handwriting on the envelope still that careful, deliberate penmanship that had once seemed so trustworthy. She sat with the letter unopened for 3 days. Then she poured herself a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened it. Callum had written 4 pages. She read them twice. He didn't ask her to wait. He didn't ask for anything. He acknowledged that he'd taken a choice away from her, the choice to know what she was walking into, and that there was no restitution he could offer for that. He told her that prison had stripped everything away and left him with himself, which had turned out to be both worse and more clarifying than he expected. He said he was working on becoming someone whose word actually meant something. He said he understood if she never wanted to hear from him again, and he said, I was wrong about everything I built, but I was never wrong about you. You were the realest thing in my life, and I treated something real like it was just part of the scenery. I am sorry, Dominique. Truly, she folded the letter, put it back in the envelope. She didn't write back. Not then, she wasn't sure she ever would. Marriage was legally dissolved. Her attorney had handled it while Callum was still awaiting sentencing. That chapter was closed, but she felt something reading that letter that she hadn't expected. Release, not reconciliation, not forgiveness, not yet, but the particular kind of release that comes when someone finally says out loud the thing you've been needing to hear. When the weight of unspoken acknowledgement lifts, even just slightly. She put the letter in her nightstand drawer, and she went back to painting. Dominique had not stopped painting through any of it. Not through the arrest, not through Pearl's illness, not through the grief, not through the anger that had lived in her chest like a stone for 2 years. She had painted through all of it, because it was the only thing that made sense when everything else stopped making sense. She had a small space now, a studio sublet on Auburn Avenue in Sweet Auburn, a neighborhood that felt like it had history in its walls, which suited her fine. She taught classes 4 days a week. She sold work online. She had landed a grant from the Georgia Council for the Arts that paid her rent for a full year. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, completely, unambiguously hers. She'd been working on a new series for 6 months. Large-scale canvases, women in motion, women carrying things, women letting things down. She painted in layers, base colors she'd paint over, new shapes built on top of old ones, so that if you looked closely at the finished canvas, you could see the ghost of something underneath. The thing that had been there before the final image. A collector from Charleston had seen the series online and offered to show 3 pieces in her gallery. It was the biggest exhibition opportunity Dominique had ever had. She called Simone to tell her. Simone's voice went up on the word. Dom, are you serious? I'm serious, Dominique said, grinning despite herself. Charleston Gallery? A real Charleston Gallery? Is there a fake kind? You know what I mean, Dom, that's huge. That's actually huge. When is it? 6 weeks. I'm coming, Simone said immediately. There was a pause, a small one, but Dominique heard it, the implicit question in Simone's voice. The if you'll have me. Yeah, Dominique said. I know, which was not the same as I want you there. But it wasn't, don't come. And Simone, who had learned to read the spaces between what her sister said, heard it exactly right. I'll drive, Simone said simply. We can take the long way, stop somewhere on the coast. Okay, Dominique said. They hung up. Dominique sat in her studio surrounded by half-finished canvases and breathed. The road back was long, she knew that. She didn't have any illusions about how quickly trust rebuilt itself once it had been broken at that level. It happened in increments, coffee by coffee, phone call by phone call, one honest moment at a time, but it was happening. They were on the road. They left Atlanta on a Friday morning. Simone drove because she always drove, had been driving Dominique places since before Dominique had her license. Old habits. The plan was to take Highway 17 south and hug the coast before dropping into Charleston. A 6-hour drive stretched into 8 if you stopped, which they did. At a diner outside Savannah that had sweet tea so strong it made your eyes water. At a stretch of beach in South Carolina where neither of them said anything for 20 minutes and just watched the water. Standing there on that beach, wind off the Atlantic, sand under their shoes, Dominique thought about the porch steps on Pemberton Street. Two little girls watching the neighborhood, one promising the other she wasn't going anywhere. "Simone," she said, "yeah, I used to be so scared you'd leave when we were kids. After Mama went, I used to have nightmares that I'd wake up and you'd be gone too." Simone was quiet. The wind lifted her braids off her shoulders. "I never told you that," Dominique said. "No," Simone said softly. "I think that's part of why it hurt so much, when you went quiet on me after Callum." It felt like the nightmare came true. Simone turned to look at her. The wind was messing up both their hair. Dominique's edges were completely done. She looked like she'd been dragged through a hedge backwards, which on a different day would have been funny. "It did come true," Simone said. "I did leave. Even while I was there, I left. And I am so sorry, Dom. I know I've said it. I'll probably say it 100 more times, but I want you to know I understand now what it cost you. Not just practically, what it cost you here." She put her hand over her own heart. Dominique looked at her. The horizon behind Simone was gold and pink. The ocean was loud. "I know you do," she said, that was all. But from Dominique, who had spent 2 years saying nothing, it was everything. They got back in the car. Simone put on a playlist. Old school Jill Scott, Erykah Badu, Mary J. Both of them knew all the words, which was embarrassing and also wonderful. By the time they crossed into Charleston, they were singing badly and loudly, and Simone took a wrong turn because she was too busy harmonizing to read the GPS, which made Dominique laugh until she had to press her hand against the window to hold herself up. "GPS literally said turn left," Dominique said, gasping. "I was in the middle of a run," Simone said, completely unapologetic. "Of what? You weren't even singing the right verse." "I was doing an interpretation." They arrived at the hotel 20 minutes late, still laughing. The showing was on Saturday evening. The gallery was a converted warehouse in the French Quarter district of Charleston, exposed brick, high ceilings, the kind of space that made art feel inevitable. The collector, a woman named Diane Monroe, had installed Dominique's 3 large canvases on the main wall. They were stunning. Dominique stood in front of them before the doors opened to the public. Just her and Simone and Diane in the empty gallery, the light warm and golden, the canvases filling the wall like windows into something true. The first painting was a woman in motion running, but not from something, toward it. Her face was lifted. Her arms were wide. The second was a woman kneeling, not in defeat, in the act of setting something down, something heavy. Her expression was not relieved, yet it was in that moment just before relief, the last second of effort before release. The third was 2 women, standing side by side, not quite touching, looking at the same horizon. Their faces were unreadable not because they had no expression, but because the expression was too complex to name easily. It was the face of people who have been through something and are still standing. Nobody in the room said anything for a while. "These are extraordinary," Diane Monroe said quietly. Simone didn't say anything. She just stood next to Dominique with her arms crossed over her chest and her jaw working like she was holding something in. "You going to cry?" Dominique asked her. "I'm absolutely not going to cry in this woman's gallery," Simone said firmly. She cried a little, just a little. She was very dignified about it. Mostly, the opening was a success. People came, people stayed. People stood in front of those 3 canvases and felt things that they couldn't quite articulate, but that moved through them visibly. You could see it in their faces, in the way they went quiet. Diane sold all 3 pieces before the evening was over. She asked Dominique when she could see more. Dominique stood in the middle of that gallery with a glass of sparkling water and felt something settle inside her. Not triumph, just solidity. Like ground under her feet where there had been a long time of nothing but water. She had built this. Through everything, she had built this. Simone found her near the end of the evening. The gallery was thinning out. People were putting on coats and saying their goodbyes. "Hey," Simone said. "Hey," Dominique said. "I need to tell you something." "God," Dominique said. "What now?" Simone laughed, a real laugh. "Nothing bad, She stopped, tried again. "I am so proud of you, and not because of this." She gestured around the gallery. "Not because of the paintings or the showing or the success. I'm proud of you because of what it took to get here, what you survived, what you kept building even when everything was falling down. That's Dom, that's not ordinary, that's not something most people can do." Dominique looked at her sister. "Pearl knew it," Simone said softly. "She wrote it in that journal, but I knew it too, long before any of this. I've always known it." Outside the gallery, Charleston was warm and full of the sound of the city. The smell of salt air drifted in every time the door opened. "Thank you for coming," Dominique said. "Thank you for letting me," Simone said. They stood in that gallery together, and it wasn't perfect, it wasn't the easy, seamless sisterhood they'd had before. That version of their relationship was gone, and they both knew it. What they were building now was something different, something that knew what it had survived, something that had scar tissue in it, but it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough. They drove back to Atlanta on Sunday. Simone drove again. Dominique took the passenger seat and let the scenery move past the window in long green stretches of highway and sky. Somewhere in South Carolina, Dominique fell asleep. When she woke up, they were just outside Macon. Simone had turned the music down low. She was driving with one hand on the wheel and one elbow on the window, easy and relaxed, the way she'd driven since she was 17. Dominique watched her sister from the passenger seat for a moment without speaking, thought about all the miles, all the damage, all the long, silent years, and then thought about Big Mama Pearl's journal, her big, looping cursive, her prayers. They just have to find their way back to each other. "Simone," Dominique said. Simone glanced over. "You're up." "Yeah." Dominique looked back out the window. "I think I'm ready." "What? To try to forgive you? For real?" "Not yet. I don't want to say the words before I mean them, but I think I'm moving toward it. I can feel it." Simone was quiet for a moment. Her jaw worked. "Okay," she said finally. Her voice was thick. "I'll be here when you get there." "I know," Dominique said, and she meant it. The highway opened ahead of them. Atlanta was 2 hours away. Sun was sitting low and orange on the horizon, and the light was coming in sideways through the windshield. And somewhere outside Macon, on a Sunday afternoon in early spring, two sisters drove home. It was not a perfect story. It was not a clean story. There was no moment where everything was magically healed, no speech that erased 2.5 years, no shortcut through the grief and the loss and the things that couldn't be undone. But it was a true story, and sometimes true is better than perfect. If this story has touched you, if it's made you think about someone in your life, about a silence that's gone on too long, about a hurt you've been carrying or a hurt you've been giving, then take a moment before you close this out. Here is what Dominique and Simone's story teaches us. Silence is not protection. Simone thought she was protecting herself. She thought she was protecting her sister. But silence in the face of truth is a slow damage that compounds over time, and the bill always comes due. What you don't say has a cost. Every time, fear is not a reason, it is an explanation, and there is a difference. You can understand why someone acted from fear and still hold them accountable for the harm it caused. Both things can be true. Forgiveness is not an event. It is a direction. You don't arrive at it all at once. You choose it gradually, imperfectly, one honest conversation at a time. And you do it not because the other person deserves it, not primarily, but because you deserve to be free. And the last thing, blood is not enough. Shared DNA does not make a sister. Shared history does not make a sister. What makes a sister, what makes any relationship worth keeping, is the willingness to tell the truth, even when it's terrifying, even when the timing is wrong, even when you don't know how it will land. Say the thing, show up. Choose the person over the comfort of your own silence. Big Mama Pearl would tell you the same, and she would be right. Thank you so much for being here for the story of two sisters, one betrayal. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below and tell us, are you Team Dominique or Team Simone? Have you ever been in a situation like this on either side of it? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. There are more coming, stories about love, family, survival, and the choices that define us. Until next time, take care of each other, and tell your people you love them before the moment passes. See you next time.